I'm kind of floored at the opportunity to be here with you at Stanford, one of the leading institutions of higher education in the whole world, and with all of you tonight, that you would come out on a Thursday night thinking about all the other good things you could do, and you're here. And I'm really glad. I feel grateful that you're here. My intention is to explore the fundamental process of growth. How do we heal? How do we grow? What's it feel like to learn something useful, to develop in some way, to become happier, to become wiser, to become loving, to become more resilient, to become more committed to exercise, not eating so many cookies, or social justice? What's that fundamental process like? What's it like to become more mindful? To move from state to trait in a long-term way. And so I want to explore with you the general how of that applied to growing whatever psychological resources of various kinds would be of use to you, and which you can then apply, the methods that you can apply to helping students, children, patients, clients, friends, even your bosses. I don't know about presidents, but we'll get there later, to actually learn and grow from the experiences they're having already in life. So that's my hope. Tia will post these slides probably by tomorrow or the next day, certainly. And I put a lot of stuff in them that you might find of interest. So I'm going to hit kind of the high points today and also try to do things that are experiential, to try to practice what I'm going to be preaching tonight. And so therefore there's a lot of background material, including I think 6 slides worth of books and papers as references, and a lot of detailed how-to, if you're interested in that for yourself or other people, that are in the slides. And you're always very welcome to use that material, change it, adapt it, reuse it in your own work, however you like. Also, I have a lot of related resources that are freely offered on my website, rickhanson.net. And there too, you can get talks or videos or slide sets from a bajillion workshops I've taught. That's a lot of where my IP lives, in PowerPoint. I'm a little ambivalent about my relationship with Bill Gates because I'm a Mac kind of guy. But that said, just set that aside. You're very welcome to take what's there and use it for yourself. So there's background for what I'm going to go through. Okay, so that's the general idea. I'll end very, 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 very close to 8:30. I don't think, well, I'll feel my way into it. I don't know if we're going to take a formal break here, 2 hours, probably pushing the limits, but we'll see what we can do. Maybe I will actually take a little break somewhere in the middle. And I'll stick around for a bit, and then I need to make my way north to San Rafael. So that's the plan here. I'll pause periodically for questions, discussion, complaints, objections, something. We'll get to it. And again, I'm really happy to kind of go wherever you like, basically. Okay, so that's the overview. And to enter into this topic territory, I'd like to share with you a story that you may well have heard yourself. I've actually heard it in different ways, framed in different ways. I'll just share it with you here the way it came to me. A woman was asked toward the end of her life by the people she lived with and worked with, "Grandmother, how did you become so wise? What did you do? How did you become so happy? What did you do? How did you become so loved? And how did you become so effective and successful? What did you do?" She paused and reflected and said, "You know, I think it's because when I was young like you are, I realized that in my heart were 2 wolves, one of love and one of hate. And most important, I realized that everything depended upon which one I fed each day." That's the story. So deep, told it many times. I always get affected when I tell it and reflect on it. There's a pointing there certainly to the wolf of hate, metaphorically speaking, that's in almost everyone's heart, including my own, that capacity, sometimes inclination toward vengeance, envy, aggression, violence, even war. If we hate the wolf of hate, we just feed the wolf of hate. We need to come to terms with it, but it's there. What do we do with it? How do we practice with it? And more fundamentally for our purposes today, tonight, there's this fundamental point about how do we grow the wolf of love, and really the whole larger wolf pack of all those good things to develop in ourselves, including toughness, grit, endurance, resilience. How do we grow those things inside ourselves? Well, it's based on what we feed, what we cultivate every day. So with that as a kind of metaphor, I'd like to talk a little bit as a movement into the underlying process in the nervous system of change, including particularly change for the better. And then I'll slow it down and I'll do some experiential practice with you along the way. And then we'll get into more detail too. Okay? So the framing here for me is how do we grow mental resources, psychological resources, internal resources represented in the mind, broadly speaking. How do we grow internal resources for resilient well-being? How do we actually do that? And here I'm going to draw on the familiar stress diathesis model, as it's sometimes called, from medicine and psychology, which I've modified a bit, as others do as well, which says that essentially the course over a day or a lifetime of a person's life is the result of three kinds of factors, three categories of factors. The challenges of various kinds that bear on the person, their stresses, their burdens, the illnesses, the circumstances that wear on them. Second, their vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities that those challenges penetrate through, the chinks in the armor, the predispositions, the sensitivities that those challenges wear on. Third, offset by resources that help us manage challenges and protect and shore up and compensate for vulnerabilities. Fundamental model. Now, all are really important. Sometimes people frame these conversations as either or. All are really important. That said, personally, I think that building resources has some special opportunities related to it. There does tend to be more, literally, opportunity there. And also, resources has a positive orientation and a forward focus. And often there are things we can do fairly quickly to grow resources of various kinds, while challenges are slow to change and vulnerabilities are sometimes permanent. Okay, resources. Where are challenges, vulnerabilities, and resources located? Simply, out in the world, in the body, in the mind. All are really important, again, but growing resources in the mind has, here too, some special power, because we tend to have more ability to impact the development of resources in the mind than we have over developing resources out in the world or in the physical body, especially if you, like me, are actually aging. But in the mind, you can always grow something good there, no matter what your situation is, and you take your mind with you wherever you go. So, as my kids tease me, so Dad, what's your 4x17 matrix for this one? I think immediately a 3x3 matrix, challenges, vulnerabilities, resources, world, body, mind, bingo, the ninth cell. That will not be the title of a best-selling book. The ninth cell, resources in the mind, is where I want to focus with you here, because I think that's full of opportunity and potential and agency. We can actually do good things ourselves. So what are some classic kinds of mental resources? I should say I'm a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. I have a long history starting in the human potential movement in the early 1970s. Also a lot of clinical training and developmental psychology along the way, with a deep interest in and engagement with neuroscience and contemplative training. I think of what I do in some sense, it's a pretty geeky term, as applied neurodharma. I don't know how popular that term will ever be, but when I think about the intersection, if you will, of three circles, clinical psychology or psychology in general, neuroscience and contemplative wisdom. Think about where those three circles intersect. I just think that territory is full of opportunity. So whether it's in reference to psychology or frankly many of the spiritual traditions, we see this respect for and appreciation for many different kinds of muscles, mental muscles, to put it a certain way. Character strengths, traditional virtues, mindfulness certainly, resilience, secure attachment, positive mood, positive emotion, various kinds of social skills, know-how. These are the things that really, really help us along the way. And they're good to have, and there's a lot of research about the value of them. All right? So that's the good stuff. How do we get it? It's interesting that there are lots and lots of debates about the heritability of various beneficial factors. On the whole, to a large extent, arguably less than half the variance in psychological attributes is due to heritable factors. That means that the remaining half, or ballpark estimates on average, roughly 2/3 of the variance in personal characteristics, including the degree to which we have various psychological resources, are in principle related to things that we acquire or are shaped by along the way, besides what's already baked into our DNA. That's really quite hopeful, because it says that we have lots of possibility, but it also takes us to responsibility, both at a public policy level, certainly, and at an individual practice level. What will we do about the possibilities that we have and the power that we actually have to grow the good inside ourselves and inside other people? We do it fundamentally through processes of learning, broadly defined. The least important learning of all is the one that tends to be valued the most, which is a kind of learning I was good at: academic learning, fact-based learning, learning of various ideas, important and interesting and wonderful as it is, generally what makes the most difference in people's lives in terms of outcomes they care about, including lifetime earnings, income over the lifetime, or relationship satisfaction, or peace of mind, or longevity, or contribution as judged even by other people. The factors that make the most difference there have to do more with emotional learning, bodily, embodied somatic learning, social learning, motivational learning, attitudinal learning, and if it's of interest to anyone, self-actualization learning, and even spiritual learning as well. So the question is, how do we do that learning skillfully? And that's what I want to talk with you tonight. So from the inside out, you can hack your own nervous system, as it were, and steepen your personal growth curve as you go through life. And I also want to put this in context. So I'm trained in my own contemplative background, mainly in the Buddhist tradition. I will offer notions from science today, from clinical practice, and also from the world's contemplative traditions, not to pitch any of those, but simply to offer them, and then you judge for yourself what their merits may or may not be. It's sometimes, there's an objection that sometimes appears from certain schools of psychology, as well as certain schools among the world's contemplative traditions, that being interested in cultivation, in development, is somehow a problem. And instead, we should just all drop into oneness already with the divine everything. Well, great if you can do it for more than a second or two in a row, but what about development along the way? So I just want to kind of put up a slide here, partly to protect my flanks for critique from a certain quarter that I'm sympathetic to, that even monastics who are very, very trained in a tradition of open awareness, choiceless awareness, and bare witnessing also appreciate the value of cultivation. All right? I also want to put this in context. So of all my slides, which, as I've said, are going to be posted, I would put this one among the top 5. It's a framework we're going to come back to again and again, and it's one that I've drawn on many times, including as a kind of sequential roadmap for working through personally upsetting material. As someone who's engaged, I'm a methods guy. As someone who's engaged methods, tools, practices, including more cognitively oriented ones, in both traditional psychology and many other traditions, I think all those methods boil down or sort into 3 groups. First group, the first way to skillfully relate to and engage the mind is to be with what's there. We feel the feelings, we experience the experience, we bow to what's there, we bear the pain. Hopefully we do it skillfully with some self-compassion, with some curiosity, with some disidentification. We step back from the material to witness it rather than being, as we would say, plugged into it or hijacked by it or identified with it. We may also sense down into what's more vulnerable or younger or softer. We may sort of deconstruct our experience, investigate it, and tease it apart in a kind of an active way, but we're not actually trying to change it. It may change in the process of doing that, but we're not exerting wise effort of some kind to actually change the stream of consciousness. I think this mode of practice, this mode of engaging the mind, is the most fundamental. It's also our last resort, because sometimes it's all you can do, is to ride out the storm without pouring gasoline on the fire. And also, as practice of various kinds matures, you see people who are far along the path, and you can see it in your own self, that more and more you're resting in this first way of engaging the mind. Just being with what's there, at peace, at the front edge of now, moment by moment by moment. All right. But it's not the only way to practice. And in my encounter with human potential and psychology and the spiritual traditions and the movement of the Eastern traditions into the West over the period of my adulthood in particular, I think this first way to practice has gotten overvalued in some quarters. That there's a kind of dogmatic argument you'll encounter fairly often that the most important way to practice, if not the only way you should practice, is simply to witness the stream of consciousness rolling on by. I think it's really important, but I don't think it's the only way to practice, and I don't think it's the only way to practice that the great saints and sages have taught, and definitely it's not the only way to practice that's supported by research on the change process, the neuropsychology of change over the last 100 years. We also need to work with the mind skillfully. We need to decrease the negative by preventing it in the first place, reducing it or abandoning it. For example, releasing tension from the body as you exhale, letting go. Venting emotions in various ways, hopefully skillfully. Challenging pathogenic beliefs, cognitions, and ridding yourself of them gradually. Abandoning unwholesome desires. These are very important practices, and in many ways, the bulk of the methods in clinical psychology are kind of in this category. So a lot of useful, skillful means here, reducing the negative. Also, we need to grow the good. We need to cultivate wise perspectives, wise intentions, wise speech, wise livelihood, to cultivate resilience, grit, endurance, courage, moral commitments, understanding of other people, the capacity to empathize with people who are not like me. We need to grow those things. And as we will see, we have a nervous system that is indeed changed by our experiences, but is slow to grow the good, slow to disengage from into the witnessing position, and very good at holding on to the negative because of the brain's evolved negativity bias. So if I were to sum up this framework, and I'm going to focus here with you on the third of these, in the context of the other two, we could think of these three ways to engage the mind as summarized as let be, let go, let in. Or if we imagine the mind as like a garden, we can witness the garden, pull weeds, and plant flowers. They all work together, and it's in that context then that I'm going to talk about this one. I would say in passing that when we're upset about something, this is a natural sequence to move through. First, we be with what is there, maybe for a dozen seconds, maybe for a dozen months, because it's hit us so hard. And it's important in my experience, as I've learned later in life, to truly open to everything that's there and not hurry up and try to fix it and make it better. And often we find that if we jump to fixing it or making it better and it doesn't have traction, aha, that's a clue. We need to go back and feel it most fully and more deeply, typically. Okay? So that said, we start with what's there, and then at some point it feels like, okay, I've touched the pain long enough. I felt like I landed in adulthood with a bucket of tears. I had to empty it just one spoonful at a time. One spoonful was it, at a time. But still, it was a legitimate spoonful. And spoonful by spoonful, you can indeed empty a bucket eventually. Or maybe you just know, like, oh, that's my familiar, yapping away, I'm ready to move on. Or it just feels like there's kind of an emptying out, and you're ready to let go now. And so then you move into letting go in a variety of ways, releasing, and then, very importantly, replace what has been released. Very often, the change process is taught with just the first two steps. Identify what you're experiencing, name it, know it, own it, feel it, and then, okay, let go, fine, but there's no attention to the replacement phase of the full trajectory of healing and growth and transformation. And as any gardener knows, if you don't replace the weeds you've pulled with some flowers, the weeds come back. Okay so far? So that's kind of a framework here for what I hope to do with you. And I thought to start, as we slide into acquiring mental resources, we could do a little experiment in the laboratory of your own mind, which means the laboratory as well of your own brain, your own nervous system, and do a little practice with you for several minutes. So, as with anything I say, just go your own way. Do what's useful to you. Feel free to ignore what I'm suggesting and adapt anything I'm suggesting to your own purposes. Right? Okay? So I thought what we could do is do a little practice related to gratitude. And I'll offer some suggestions. So this is a cultivation practice. It's not a bear witnessing practice. There's a deliberateness. There's a little bit of effort in the mind. And I'll offer some suggestions that I'll unpack later that are plausibly based in research on the neuropsychology of learning that can plausibly, these factors, increase the impact, the registration, the durable change based upon what you're experiencing here. And then we'll talk about it more intellectually. Okay? So here's a suggestion, if you like. The first step is to have some kind of useful experience. We don't have a brain, we don't have the technology, rather, I hope we never do in some ways, that they had in the Matrix where you jack a cable into the back of the head and suddenly you can fly a helicopter or do kung fu. No, brain is old school. It's like an old-fashioned recorder where you have to play the song to record it. So we start with an experience. So I'm going to use gratitude as a suggestion. So if you're up for it, start thinking of one or more things that you feel grateful for. Help yourself have an experience of gratitude. Could be simple things like paper clips. Could be people in your life, pets, friends. Could be something quite awe-inspiring, life itself, the universe. Help yourself to activate an experience of gratitude. And then I'm going to offer a few suggestions to help the experience really sink in so it's more internalized. So for one, see if you can stay with it. In effect, take gratitude as your object of meditation, rather than the sensations of breathing or a word or image. Take the feeling of gratitude as your object of attention. Marinate in gratitude. As you stay with it, allow it to become more intense, to pervade your mind. So you're giving over to gratitude and also feeling it increasingly in your body. So it's not just conceptual. If your mind wanders, that's normal. Come back to it. To help something sink in, it's also useful to recognize why it's personally relevant to you, or important to you, or meaningful to be grateful. You might have a sense of gratitude sinking into you like water into a sponge, or spreading in you, establishing itself in you. It helps to have a strong sense of enjoying this, finding what's pleasurable, enjoyable about gratitude. Okay, come on back, and you can keep feeling grateful, of course, with your eyes open. So that was about 3 minutes, I think, ballpark. A lot can happen in a brain in 3 minutes. Neurons are typically firing 5 to 50 times a second. The neural substrates of working memory and the upper outer areas of neocortex tend to refresh themselves 4 to 6 times a second. It's like the refresh rate on a monitor, which is one reason why the temporal granularity of experience is roughly 4 mental events per second if you're particularly mindful. So a lot can happen in a second, right? Very large patterns of synchronized activation involving millions, if not billions, of neurons firing synchronously 5, 10, 50, even 80 times a second are sharing information with each other. A lot can happen in 2 or 3 minutes. So plausibly, I'll talk a little bit later about what could have been happening in your own nervous system as you were helping that experience of gratitude to sink in. But first I want to just find out from you, anybody want to share just kind of briefly what you experienced or what that was like for you? Oh, so I'll just restate it too for people. So there you were finding things that you're grateful for, and then alongside that, other things were coming up. Yes, but, doubts, but what about this, and so forth. That's a very normal process, partly because the brain essentially is a big network, so it is one thing associates to another. And one of the benefits I have found in focusing on resources, particularly if you're working with other people, is that it starts to surface all kinds of amazing things, that you had no idea were there. Like, wow, isn't it interesting? Like, let's say, you know factually that whatever you're grateful for is true. It exists. It's existent. And you know that if there were someone else who was having those facts, you'd say, yeah, it's perfectly fine for you to be grateful. There's not a problem with it. You're not going to become a real jerk about it, right? And yet, for ourselves, it's hard to let ourselves have that beneficial experience. And that's a very interesting thing to become more mindful of in ourselves, and also to become more aware of it if we work with other people, including informally, like raising children. What to do about it is pretty simple and straightforward. The key is what you did there. You noticed it. And usually when we notice it, we realize, weird, and isn't that interesting that I can't keep my attention here? It keeps getting dragged over there. Wait a second, that's a fundamental issue of autonomy inside your own mind. Wait a second, can't I control my own attention for 20 seconds to just feel good about something that's true? What, right? And another thing that happens is you start to realize that some of the justifications for these other things coming up, call them blocks, are just not applicable. Like maybe there's a thought, well, if you start being grateful for that, you're going to take your eye off the ball. Stay thirsty, my friends, as the most interesting man in the world says in the Dos Equis commercials, right? Right? Stay hungry. And then you think to yourself, well, okay, I hear that, but is it actually true? Is it actually true that if I were more grateful, I'd actually become less ambitious? Actually, generally, it's not true, as research on gratitude shows, that often it's because people, as they cultivate gratitude and develop it, and among other benefits, it helps them become more resilient and able to withstand stress, they also become more willing to take risks. Because they're grateful for so much already, they're more willing to risk going for it and flopping because they have a sense of a big safety net already in their life. So if anything, gratitude promotes ambition. So this is just an example of a general process of curiosity about, I call them blocks. The blocks that are surfaced, they're very normal, they're very interesting. Like, whoa, you turn over that rock. Oh, I had no idea you lived under that, right? And then second, to realize that most of the time what they're trying to tell you is important, but it's not that relevant. You can still accomplish the purpose of, let's say, protecting yourself, or being ambitious, or retaining a personal modesty, while also allowing yourself to have and use authentic beneficial experiences.
Whatever.
Yeah. So, I won't do justice to it. His parents have both passed away, and somehow, their wedding ring appeared on the floor of his car. And you were saying that he'd had a difficult relationship with his mother all his life, and he picked up that ring and he put it on. I suspect you're wearing it right now even. Yeah, I looked at your hand there. And as a reminder of drawing your attention to what was good about your mom and the relationship there. And that, as you said, has changed your life. So if I could just kind of draw attention to two parts in what you said. The first is that whatever is bad, I mean that pragmatically, not morally, as harmful or painful, whatever is bad is not reduced or covered over by noticing what's good. The two can live in parallel. We can see our parents, we can see ourselves, we can see reality as a kind of mosaic with complexity. And one of the things that I find is really important is to deliberately, and we'll see why in a bit about the negativity bias, pay attention to what's good as a kind of compensation for the ways that the brain and often culture trains us to look for what's problematic first. And second, because attending to what's beneficial and useful strengthens us to deal with the real problems of things. That's one thing. And then the second thing I just wanted to call out of what you were saying was there could be, you said it changed your life. There could be the particular impact of that. And also in addition, I've seen people get benefit from a general stance of looking for what's true and beneficial in general. And that often has a really big impact on people, recognizing the possibility of the good. So in addition to the particular resources that get grown, a more general shift of attitude. So I don't know, but that's those are reflections I have on that. So thank you very much. All right. Oh yeah. So I'll keep going. So now I want to talk about the how of this. And I'm going to move through some material fairly briskly to preserve time for discussion, questions, and some more experiential practice. Okay? So if we're interested in acquiring mental resources, for me that suggests that it could be useful to think about 4 learning curves schematically. Imagine 4 days, 4 different people having a day, or imagine 4 different courses of psychotherapy, or participation in a structured growth program like mindfulness-based stress reduction, or just life in general. Okay? So over here we have acquired mental resources, trait-based resources of various kinds, including happiness, or wisdom, or inner peace, or grit over here. And then we have the course of time. This is someone who's gone downhill. All right? So that's the first illustrative life. Then we have the second illustrative life, someone whose learning curve is flat. You might think of yourself like what you actually got out of some kind of personal growthy event, including just talking with a friend at midnight in the dorm about something or other. What actually changed? I mean, for me, it's haunting and humbling to recognize how often we change and then fairly rapidly we revert back to same old, same old. Okay. What's involved in that? Then we have the third life in which there's genuine, linear growth over time, learning, development, healing, in terms of acquiring greater mental resources, including just well-being altogether. And then we have the fourth life curvilinear growth, a steepening and increasing of the rate of change over time. This is someone who's learning how to learn, who's getting better at getting better along the way. By the way, one reason I present things the way I do is to offer to people, it's kind of Darwinian in a sense. These are ways I've learned to talk about this stuff, including to a general audience and teenagers and young people too, and also my own parents along the way. So I find these curves actually quite telling and profound. And to ask oneself, what does it take to have the third or the fourth growth curve over time? Okay? What it means fundamentally is changing the brain, or more generally the nervous system and the body altogether. The change process, the healing process, growth and development involves the whole body, but it primarily involves the nervous system, especially the headquarters of the nervous system, the brain. So pragmatically the question is, how do we get those green balls into the brain? And that takes us to the neuropsychology of learning. So the neuropsychology of learning suggests that learning proceeds in two steps. We must first experience something, which involves some neural state, that's the correlate of the mental state that we're having. And when I say the word mental, I don't just mean philosophy or intellect, I mean any contents of consciousness. Sensation, emotion, memory, imagery, insight, revelation, some kind of mental state. So this is an MRI slide of a brain that's sliced like this, looking that way, of a meditator. I think it might, in a study, and these monks, these are Tibetan monks, were asked to mobilize loving kindness for all beings while stuck in an MRI. And I've had a few MRIs lately, and they're weird, claustrophobic, and loud. So if you're going to radiate loving kindness non-referentially to all beings, you've got to concentrate. And that's part of that blob there, is in the cingulate cortex, it's called, which is a major part of the brain that's involved in the executive top-down regulation of attention. In other words, sustaining attention for the duration of the experiment inside the MRI to loving kindness radiating to all beings. So, in other words, we had a situation here where a person was having a mental state which inherently involves some kind of underlying neural correlate. I'm just pulling this particular slide out because this is Contemplation by Design Week, and it's kind of neat. And at the top are 4 words that you see recurring in the Buddhist tradition to describe a sincere practitioner. And I like those words. I kind of call them out: ardent, heartfelt, diligent, resolute, and mindful. Okay, so we start with a state, and then we take it from there. Almost all human learning of any significant kind involves or begins with, at its front end, some kind of experience, some kind of conscious process. There is a certain amount of unconscious learning, and you can manipulate people with carefully controlled experiments, but almost all of the meaningful learning that we have, including the emotional, somatic learning I'm talking about, begins with an experience of one kind or another. Okay? So we have the languaging here encoded, consolidated, and reconsolidated in the lasting changes of neural structure or function. To kind of summarize it, mental activity entails underlying neural activity. Otherwise, we're left with magic. Now, cutting a frame here, I'm going to stay inside the natural frame of science and so forth. I think it's quite plausible to imagine that there are supernatural, if not transcendental forces and factors that are meaningfully distinct from the natural frame. But that said, I'm going to stay inside the natural frame of Western science. I acknowledge the possibility of the transcendental. I'm personally quite interested in that possibility, but pragmatically, I'm going to stay inside this frame, just acknowledging where I'm moving here. So inside that frame, there must be underlying neural activity as the physical basis for immaterial mental activity. Repeated patterns of mental activity entail repeated patterns of neural activity, and the essence of experience-dependent neuroplasticity, repeated neural activity builds neural structure and changes neural function. It leaves lasting traces behind. This whole idea is summarized in the work from the Canadian neuroscientist Donald Hebb with the increasingly well-known saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. So we have this two-stage process. The firing together being the correlates, the underpinnings of an experience, and the wiring together, being the process of change. Since this is Stanford University, I wanted to show up and not suck, so I listed a whole bunch of mechanisms of experience-dependent neuroplasticity. There will be no midterm later on any of this material. The takeaway point is just to kind of go down there and go, wow, there are a lot of ways that the nervous system has evolved to be changed by our experiences. There are many, many mechanisms of neuroplasticity. Plasticity being the changeability of something, neuroplasticity, the changeability of the nervous system, experience-dependent neuroplasticity being the changeability of the nervous system due to our thoughts, our feelings, our hopes, our dreams, and our sorrows. There's a tremendous amount of evidence for the impact of experiences on the brain. Much of that evidence comes from studies on non-human animals. Obviously, there are many ethical questions related to that research. That said, tremendous number of findings there that indicate a variety of ways in which the presumptive experiences of the mouse or monkey or worm or crawfish that recently has been studied in terms of anxiety and fear, that those experiences leave lasting changes. This is a neat slide from a neat study done on long-term mindfulness meditators. How many of you do something contemplative? A minute or more a month? A month. Okay, good, it's the low bar. No more questions. All right, these are not perfect meditators. I know some of the people in the study, they would be the first to tell you they were not perfect meditators. But that said, compared to matched control, Sarah Lazar and her colleagues at Harvard found that cortex was measurably thicker in 3 key regions for the meditators compared to the matched controls. Region number 1 is the insula on the inside of the temporal lobes that's very involved with interoception. Right now, if you tune into the fact that the air coming in is relatively cool and the air you're exhaling maybe through your nose is a little bit warmer, you're engaging in interoception. If you tune into your gut feelings, how you really feel about somebody or what your take is about someone, you're probably engaging the insula. Well, meditators are firing that function a lot by tuning into themselves, and in the process of that, plausibly, they are growing more connections between existing neurons, sensitizing existing synapses, and bringing more capillary blood flow to the part of the brain that does that thing, that engages that activity of interoception and builds structure in the process. The second major region up there is behind the forehead. Prefrontal regions involved in the executive regulation of attention, emotion, and behavior. That too is what you're doing when you meditate. Bringing attention back again and again. Sustaining attention to whatever the object of attention is. So these meditators worked that muscle. Kind of like working the tricep, distinct from the bicep. They worked that muscle and they built structure there too. And then they got a little bonus benefit, somatosensory cortex, top of the head, because they were tuning into their body. Okay? There are many other forms of evidence for lasting change of neural structure or function due to repeated patterns of experiences. This is a cool one. Down here, I just want to draw your attention to the scatter plot. Normally, so we start out with about 1.1 trillion cells inside our head, roughly 10% of which, about 100 billion or so, are neurons. A typical neuron is making several thousand connections on average, some much more, some less, with other neurons. Well, if you do the math, 100 billion neurons, several thousand connections each, we're talking about several 100 trillion synapses, each one of which is like a little microprocessor. And there's other forms of information processing in the nervous system as well. So in that larger context, we lose brain cells every day due to normal processes of aging. Estimates vary. I heard an estimate of about 10,000 a day. That may seem like a lot, but over the lifespan, when you start with 1.1 trillion, you still have most of your cells left. That's a little bit offset by neurogenesis and the hippocampus. Again, estimates vary, 700 to 1,400 are estimates I've seen typically recently. This is an active area of research. So there's a little bit of offset for new baby neurons being born, but we do lose neurons. That process that produces normal cortical thinning over time is associated with normal cognitive decline over time. Not dementia, not Alzheimer's, but having issues with names, wandering into a room to do something and forgetting why you wandered into the room to do it, having to go back to your home base. Oh, that's right, I needed to change this, something or other. Okay, but take a look. The blue circle meditators, the older blue circle meditators in these three key regions had cortex that was just as thick as that of the younger blue circle meditators and the younger red square controls. By the way, there were many more people in the study than you can see here. This is just illustrative. But the older non-meditators, the red square non-meditators, did have normal cortical thinning in these key regions. In other words, the meditators used it, so they did not lose it along the way, which has lots of implications for everyone, including an aging population. Okay? So I'm going to blitz through a couple of things and then do another little practice with you. All right? So here's the takeaway. And people constantly forget the second step. Mental resources are acquired fundamentally in a two-stage process. Activation, installation. Encoding, consolidation. State to trait. And my focus with you tonight is to really zero in on the critically important, necessary second step in the learning process, including healing, development, growth, transformation process that's so easy to overlook as we blaze on to the next shiny object, the next experience. We become more mindful by having experiences of mindfulness, step one, that are, step two, installed as the gradual development or increase of trait mindfulness. Same for developing happiness or self-confidence or greater comfort with being assertive or greater healthy entitlement that your needs matter too in your family. We start by having the experience of whatever we want to grow, and then we take it into ourselves in some lasting, durable way. This is the fundamental process. The cautionary point, though, is that experiencing does not equal learning. And activation without installation may be pleasant or useful in the moment, but by definition, there's no durable transformation. By definition, there's no lasting value. We know this logically. I'm not saying anything that's revelatory, right? And yet it's so easy to forget this. And I say that about myself. I teach this stuff routinely, and I routinely forget it. It's haunting. If we think about our clients, our students, our patients, those we supervise, anybody we're trying to help, and ourselves, what fraction of beneficial mental states, useful thoughts, feelings, sensations, desires, what fraction of those actually have any kind of lasting change? And I think that professionals, including myself, as well as people in general, are quite good at activation. Generally speaking, we're effective at calling forth, inducing, encouraging useful thoughts, emotions, behavioral patterns. We're pretty good at that. But in my observation, and I see this routinely when I look at studies or I talk with other peers about what they're actually doing, or I go on a meditation retreat, or I teach a meditation retreat, generally speaking, I think that we're not so focused on installation, and that reduces the gain from the experience we're having, the experiences we're having. What's the rate of return on the experiences we're having? To put it in business language, it's like, what's the interest rate on your savings? And if there's not much rate of return, then a lot of our efforts are momentarily pleasant, but they have no lasting value. It's quite profound to really consider that. And then meanwhile, there's a bias for negative experiences, painful, harmful experiences, to be rapidly internalized and converted into lasting changes of neural structure or function. Before I slide into that, I want to do another little experiential practice for you, because this could get really dreary, and I'm going to move into the good news really, really soon. So, you up for another little experiential thing? Sure. Okay? Internal. All right. So, this is another key resource. So, gratitude is a key resource. This is another key resource that I think we often don't pay enough explicit attention to in the helping professions, but it's really fundamental. And if you're up for it, to do this, it's the experience of feeling strong. Feeling strong. Now, there are many ways to feel strong, including enduring. I think enduring, surviving, living through it is a highly underrated form of strength that I think often there's a, if I could tiptoe through the minefield of gender, tends to be underappreciated in women in particular, just the strength of endurance, the strength of staying with it, still being here. And so, however you want to do it, right now, I'll encourage you first to have and then to take in some kind of experience of strength. Being able to self-activate useful states of being is central to coping, personal growth, spiritual practice. So in this case, I'm inviting you to call up some sense of strength. Doesn't mean tipping into violent aggressiveness. So you might, right now, I'll offer a few prompts. These are ones I use myself. Bring up in your mind kind of the body memory of pushing through something, maybe in wilderness, maybe holding that yoga pose the last few seconds, or really standing up for someone. Start to call up, to activate some experience of strength. Could be determination, seriousness. A gritty sense of, I'm not going to be defeated by this. And then once you start to have that experience, let's do some things to really heighten the registration of it, the internalization. Such as, you might want to move a little in your body, sitting up a little straighter. There's a lot of research these days on embodied cognition. Whatever works for you, not some kind of phony posturing, but just what works for you. What's it feel like when you mean business? How do you hold yourself when there's a sense of gravity? Staying with this experience. Noticing any resistance to being strong, any limitation. Like you might get attacked if people see that you're strong. Or it might lead into anger too quickly. And see if you can just stay with whatever's beneficial and good here about feeling strong. Tonight I'll offer a variety of prompts or cues, find your own. The last one I'll offer right here is you might explore the sense of letting yourself be changed a little bit for the better. In an authentic sense, a sense of, okay, I'm going to let this strength, in this case strength, occupy me, inhabit me, or establish itself in me in a way that I'm comfortable with. I'm one bit more comfortable, I'm helping myself be one bit more comfortable with really owning my power, my strength, my durability. And then, important thing, if you like, start opening your eyes if they've been closed and see what it's like to transition into the next thing while still retaining the benefits or fruits of whatever your practice just was. Often we jump too quickly, we change the channel too quickly to the next thing. We don't allow the benefits of the previous thing to keep reverberating in us. So I'm encouraging you to apply that general idea here to the sense of being strong. Okay. So now that you're strong, let's talk about the negativity bias. Okay? So, there's a great deal of research on the negativity bias. It's offset by an optimism bias in some, often not that significant ways. And also there's a bias for positivity in personal recollections. I've done a ton of rock climbing, and I edit out how much my feet were killing me, jammed into those tiny shoes and those squishy cracks. And I just remember how good it felt when I got to the top with my friend, for example. So people do tend to edit pain out of their personal recollections. But for emotional learning, motivational learning, social learning, learning of self-concept, learning that changes over time, the wallpaper of the mind, the inner atmosphere, what it feels like to be you, clearly there's much evidence that indicates a negative bias. So how did we, it jumped, here we go. Why do we have this negativity bias? Well, generally you can't run experiments double-blind on evolution, but plausibly. Our ancestors needed both to get carrots, food, mating opportunities, etc., and they needed to avoid sticks, like predators or hazards of various kinds. And both are important, but the difference is that sticks generally have more urgency and impact for survival, living to see the sunrise and pass on genes and help them pass on more genes. Because if you fail to get a carrot today, you'll have a chance of one tomorrow. But if you fail to avoid that stick today, no more carrots forever. So we have a brain today that does 5 things routinely. 1, scans for bad news out in the world, but also in the body and in the mind. Constantly looking, what could go wrong, what's the issue. Driving with my wife down the freeway, you can just see her foot slamming on the invisible brakes in the passenger seat. Her hand, it's normal driving, really, it's normal driving. And I say, honey, why don't you just close your eyes? You're going to be so much more comfortable. No. She wants to keep looking around as if that wards off disaster. Okay, we scan for bad news. Then we overfocus upon it. You may have heard of Barbara Fredrickson's wonderful broaden and build theory of positive emotion. The first part of that, broaden, speaks to the fact that as people have emotionally positive experiences, the perceptual field tends to widen out. We have more creative problem solving. Another reason to cultivate gratitude over the course of a career. People tend to be more creative when they see the big picture. But when we're worried about something or irritated by something or in pain about something, whoosh, perceptual field closes down upon it. Third, we overreact to it. If you put people in an MRI and you play sounds for them that are equally intense, or you show pictures for them that are equally intense, the brain will react more to the unpleasant sound. The sound of, let's say, a baby crying or a bell ringing compared to the sound of nice bells. Like the carillon bells that are going to be happening tomorrow, right, from 12:30 to 1 o'clock with lots of wonderfulness around it that I'm supposed to tell you about. And I just did. Good. Listen to the bells. Bells are good. All right. Installation. This is good. Okay. So, anyway, another thing. Here's a weird one. All right. You can take people in studies and show them pictures for about a 20th of a second. All right. So quickly, the person can't tell you what it was, let alone any details about it. They're not even sure that anything flashed. But here's the thing. Angry faces, happy faces. That's the contrast. You'll show these pictures and you'll, let's say, show the angry face and you'll say, did you see anything? And they'll go, nope, didn't see a thing. Show the happy face. Did you see anything? Nope, didn't see a thing. But when you present the angry face to people, their heart rate starts speeding up. Literally, there's a preferential bias for responding to smaller stimuli or reacting more to stimuli that are negative, for example. And then, crucially important, the whole messy package is fast-tracked into memory, especially emotional memory. We remember negative information about other people more than positive information, thus attack ads in politics. We are more affected by negative interactions in a relationship than positive interactions. There's some debate about what the ratio of positive to negative interactions needs to be for a long-term relationship, but clearly negative interactions have a greater impact. Learned helplessness, the research there. It's very easy for humans, dogs, and other mammals to acquire a sense of helplessness with just a handful, even a single experience of entrapment, futility, and defeat. And it takes many, 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 many times as many counter experiences of efficacy, agency, before a person starts feeling more like a hammer and less than a nail, less like a nail. All right, that's another example of the preferential storage of negative experiences. And then fifth, in the brain, when we're having a quote-unquote negative experience, we're irritated, we're frazzled, we're pressured, we're worried about our performance in a high-performance environment. We're comparing ourselves maybe to other people and feeling like something is wanting. We feel hurt maybe inside, or maybe we're reactivated by some material from the past. When that happens, the same neurohormonal machinery that's locked and loaded and alive and well to help our ancestors get away from saber-toothed tigers is active today. So when you're irritated or anxious or hurt or sad or feeling inadequate, cortisol is released. Cortisol moves up from the adrenal glands, top of the kidneys, goes up into the brain, crosses the blood-brain barrier. There it has a 1-2 punch. In the brain, cortisol sensitizes the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala. Technically, there are 2 amygdalae, 2 hippocampi. If there's only one of something in the brain, its origins are really ancient. But the convention is to speak of these things in the singular, which is confusing, and that's what I'll do right here. Okay, so in the brain, cortisol sensitizes the alarm bell, the amygdala, which does more than alarm belling, but that's a primary function. So now it takes less to get it going, and it rings more loudly. Also in the brain, cortisol overstimulates and can gradually kill neurons in the hippocampus, a nearby part of the brain that can lose up to 1/4 of its volume in extreme cases of serious prolonged trauma. And that's very consequential. Even ordinary experiences of repeated stress wear on the hippocampus. And that's important for 3 reasons. 1, the hippocampus puts things in context. It helps us appreciate this is now, not then. My boss is not my mother. She looks like my mother. She's a woman like my mother. She's not my mother. It's here and be here now, Rick. It's 2017. Okay, hippocampus is helpful. Hippocampus also inhibits the amygdala. It tells the amygdala to calm down. Don't worry so much. And the hippocampus signals the hypothalamus, nearby part of the brain, very important, there's only one hypothalamus, to quit calling for stress hormones. Enough already. This creates a vicious cycle. Irritating, anxiety-provoking, upsetting, hurtful, feeling frazzled and hassled experiences today sensitize the alarm bell and weaken regulation of it, which makes us more vulnerable to stress and upsetting emotional experiences tomorrow, releasing incrementally more cortisol, making us even more sensitive the day after that. That's a vicious cycle. And there's nothing comparable for sensitizing the brain to the positive. If you want to sensitize the brain to the positive, we have to work at it. And I'll talk with you momentarily about how to do that. Okay? So, and then last, we create vicious cycles with others. That's the bad news. I summarize this by saying we've got a brain that's like Velcro for the bad, but Teflon for the good. It's memorable. In effect, the negativity bias functions as a well-intended universal learning disability. It makes it harder to learn from beneficial experiences, of resources we want to grow, and it makes it easier for those red balls to get in. Essentially, from Mother Nature, it's, like I said, a well-intended universal learning disability, the result of having a brain that's optimized for peak performance in Stone Age conditions. I got to give a shout out for our daughter who photoshopped this for me. Okay. So, takeaway, brain is really good at learning from bad experiences, even though learning from good experiences is the primary way to grow inner resources and other kinds of inner strengths. So the practical question becomes, how can we increase the conversion rate from state to trait of the experiences we're having? Usually because we just notice something that's already happening, or if we deliberately create it. Right? So I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to have a formal break. I'm going to blaze on, and I will end really close to 8:30, okay? And if you need to take a break, just come on back. So here's the fundamental how of steepening personal growth curves. And how many of you are not familiar with my stuff on taking in the good or the HEAL acronym? Not familiar. Good. It's great. So that tells me to just make sure I go through it. So I've tried to summarize the fundamental process of change. I did not invent the fundamental process of change. I've just tried to organize it and systematize it, embed it in evolutionary neuropsychology, and apply it for particular purposes. This is an overarching framework that organizes a lot of plausible or research-based mental factors, internal factors of change. So I use the acronym HEAL, H-E-A-L. We need to have some kind of experience. Then we enrich the experience, we absorb it, and optionally, if we want, we can link positive and negative together. So now I'm going to unpack this acronym. So first, we have a beneficial experience, usually because we notice it's already happening. Pointing this out helps anticipate and respond to the objection that you're just making up, you're just manipulating your mind. I say, well, first of all, usually I'm talking here about just noticing what's already present and making use of it. But second, what's wrong with manipulating the mind? It's being manipulated by other people all day long. Why not manipulate it well? It's even being manipulated by our own personal history. All the crud in the bottom of the jar of our own mind that's coming up right now. Why not take charge of that process by self-activating useful states of mind? Okay. One way or another, we get that useful song playing in the inner iPod, and now we turn on the recorder. I think that enriching and absorbing are subjectively and objectively distinct. To enrich an experience, and I did this with you twice already today, it's to help yourself have a big experience with presumably a large and sustained pattern of neural activation. Absorbing subjectively feels like really receiving this big experience into yourself, and objectively absorbing means priming and sensitizing and turbocharging, as it were, the recording apparatus, the memory-making machinery inside the brain. All right? In practice, the two kind of mush together, but because I'm pragmatic and I'm trying to look for any opportunity to heighten learning, development, impact, I think it's useful to pay attention to both of these aspects of registering experiences. I have a lot of detail in the back of my slide set that goes into how to do these things. I'll just point out that enriching, I think, includes 5 different factors that will ring a bell for you when you think about them. Duration. The longer we sustain an experience, the more likely it is to sink in and have impact. Second, intensity. We let the experience be big, be powerful, even if it's subtle like tranquility, we'll let it pervade the mind. Third factor, I call it multimodality, simply means help the experience to have as many elements as possible. There's a place for a useful idea. Somewhere in my 20s, I realized that growing up, I had been a nerd, but not a wimp. That was a useful idea. There's a place for useful ideas, but where the action usually is mainly is more embodied. Sensate, emotional, motivational, pay attention to different aspects of the experience. That's multimodality. Fourth factor is novelty. The brain is a big novelty detector, so looking to explore different aspects of an experience, or looking at it, as it were, through the eyes of a child, beginner's mind, Zen mind, or locating delight or a quality of playfulness, which is useful for other reasons that I'll get to in a moment. And then last, personal relevance, salience. Why would it matter to me, given my life history, to be having this experience today? We remember, we grow from, we learn from what matters to us. So those are the 5 factors of enriching: duration, intensity, multimodality, novelty, and salience, personal relevance. Okay? Then we have absorbing, where we open to the experience, we really help it sink in, and stick to our ribs. Absorbing subjectively feels like a warmth coming in and spreading out inside you. Maybe you visualize this experience sifting down like a soft, gentle rain, or like golden dust in that book for young adults whose name is escaping me. It's The Golden Compass, there we are. Some kind of soft rain coming down. Or maybe you just feel like you're giving over to the experience. Objectively, 3 major factors that heighten the efficiency of the structure-building, function-changing machinery of the brain. One is intention, where we intend to gain from the experience. We say to ourselves, this is a keeper. Show up for this one. Let this one have impact. Be, as they say in behaviorism, a one-trial learner. Be the rat that learns the first time that there's cheese down this tunnel and annoying puffs of air down that tunnel. All right, intention. Second, sensing it coming into oneself. As we bring attention to perceptual systems, including interoception, they become more sensitized and more efficient in converting states to lasting change. And then third, track what's rewarding in the experience. When we heighten the sense of reward, that increases the activity of dopamine and norepinephrine, 2 major neurotransmitter systems. And what those do, in the hippocampus especially, is flag experiences as keepers. So if you have a sense of what's enjoyable or fun about the experience, the more likely it is to be flagged and protected in the long-term process of transfer to long-term storage, which lasts hours and even days, if not longer. Okay? So intention, sensing, and reward really heightens absorbing. To simplify this in a metaphor, it's like a fire. First, we have fire. Usually because we notice there is fire, maybe because we light the fire. We have the fire. Second, we enrich it by protecting the fire. Think how often we get skittered on to the next experience before the current beneficial experience. In our mind, or the mind of someone we're teaching or working with, how often we skitter on before what's being represented in short-term memory buffers has time to sift down into long-term storage. Okay? So we want to protect the experience. And also we add fuel to the fire so it burns more brightly. That's enriching, and then in absorbing, nice fire. Really, really, really sinking in. That's the essence of the growth process, right there. Have, enrich, and absorb. I think that's pretty much the universal essence of things. It's the fundamental how of experiential gain that you can apply to anything. You'll see aspects of what I'm saying that I've not invented present in any effective change process: psychotherapy, coaching, human resources training, mindfulness training, just talking with a friend, talking with your child. But my observation is systematic guidance in the installation phase of learning is uncommon. Some individuals do this, certain typically more somatically oriented growth processes do this, but on the whole, people leave this one out. And just about nobody does any kind of systematic training in the mental factors of learning. Personally, I pulled one together, I offered I'd do it, and after looking around for something that did it, there was nothing, so I pulled it together. But it's really quite striking that focusing on the how of learning is so poorly represented in the so-called helping professions. And so for me, therefore, that's a great opportunity. That's where we have lots of opportunity. So I'm going to zip through a couple of things and then see what you think about all this, and then we'll apply it to a few good things in particular. The linking step is optional. That's where we are aware of 2 things at once. For example, in the foreground of awareness could be feeling liked and connected with our friends, maybe our peers in a dorm or classmates or people we work with. We feel liked and connected. That's large in the foreground of awareness. And off to the side are maybe old feelings of loneliness, maybe going back to childhood, being left out, being an odd duck, being, in my case, very young going through school, lonely, off to the side. And because neurons that fire together wire together, when we're aware of two things, especially if the positive is bigger, it associates to, contextualizes, eases, soothes, and gradually replaces that negative material. This is a fundamental method or approach or category, really, of methods you'll find in formal processes of counseling and change, and also in informal things like talking with a friend about something that bothers you. Mindful witnessing is a kind of linking, because we're being with, let's say, something that's painful, upsetting, or difficult in a spaciousness of untroubled awareness. Awareness itself is never disturbed by the disturbing material it represents. It's quite remarkable to think about that. Think about the properties of awareness as like a TV screen or a monitor of some kind. The monitor itself can represent all kinds of crazy stuff, but it's never damaged by the horror movies that are rolling through it, for example. Same with awareness. Quite remarkable to appreciate. That's one reason why mindful awareness of our pain or sorrow or difficulties, it can be so powerful. Okay? It's good to take in the good. You knew that already. I'll be quick here. You grow specific resources of various kinds, both just in general and the key ones you want to grow, which I'll be talking about momentarily. Second, built into it, as we were talking a little earlier, implicitly are multiple benefits. Doing this practice as a mindfulness training, you've got to pay attention. It also implicitly is a way of treating yourself like you matter. It also is a way to be active rather than passive. One of the most, for me, beneficial aspects of this whole approach is that no matter how helpless you are about your external circumstances, or even helpless as to what's happening in your own body, some illness or disability, dysfunction, inside one's own mind, there's always agency that's available, if only to establish a witnessing stance to great pain that you can't do anything about. That's a good thing. Third, it's plausible, there's some research that's beginning to come out, that repeated having and internalizing of emotionally positive experiences might sensitize the brain to them, so it becomes more efficient at turning beneficial positive states to positive traits. Okay? One of the research papers, I love these goofy titles that you might want to look at, it's called The Joyful Amygdala. Literally, that's the title, Will Cunningham, The Joyful Amygdala. I like Will's research project. And then last, I should have, sorry, my bad. This is the slide I've been rattling on about here. Okay? And it fuels positive cycles with others, or as Lao Tzu put it a long time ago, if you keep a green bough in your heart, a singing bird will come. As we get more positive and more resourced ourselves, we start seeing opportunities. We develop more of an approach orientation rather than an avoidance orientation, more of a promotion focus rather than a prevention focus as we deal with life. That tends to create positive responses. It's not guaranteed, but it's a good odds strategy. Tends to foster positive responses to us from the world, which then gives us more opportunities to grow the good, to experience the good and grow the good inside ourselves. All right. Questions or comments so far? Thanks. By the way, you've really been paying attention. Yeah, it's impressive. All right. Questions, comments so far? And then I'm going to apply this to growing specific resources. And I'll do some more internal practice with you too. Yeah. Okay. So comment was, what did I mean when I said that among multiple examples, a meditation retreat need not inherently be a place of installation? And I love retreats. I teach them. I appreciate the value of them. I've been really profoundly changed for the better by them. That said, okay, if a person is having sustained experiences of something, let's say inner peace, calm, if a person is having those kind of experiences, or maybe sustained experiences of love, along the way, since neurons are firing together, they're going to tend to wire together as well. There's some certainly incidental learning along the way. I suspect that some people, perhaps yourself included, are doing some of the things I've been reviewing here intuitively to really help those experiences to have major impact, including really resting in them. If you were to ask a typical person during a 45-minute meditation set, for example, how many breaths were you fully present with your own experience? Most people would say only a fraction. Very few people would say over 50%, honestly. Even people who are fairly experienced. And so, but some people can really stay with the experiences they're having, which is going to tend to increase their impact. So you have individual differences. And then the question also is, are the teachers at the retreat doing anything that's even little things that are appropriate and culturally appropriate or sensitive to the situation itself to help people learn a little bit about their body? I just love the people who are really mindful of their body, but they don't want to take into account the implications that we're actually body full of mind. It's the body that's producing the mind. And that has lots of implications, particularly in terms of how we can influence the body through the mind to benefit the mind. So I'm not trying to speak at all against it, and I think sustained, relatively intense experiences, like a 5 or 10 day retreat, that's going to tend to have impact. On the other hand, there are many people who would say that there was a glow, there was an impact, but within a month or 2 or 3, they were as stressed out and neurotic as ever. You know? And then I'm not saying that's true for everyone, but I just want to raise the point that experiencing alone does not equal learning. Something else needs to happen. And then how can we help from the inside out that something else to occur? That's just what I'm raising here. And I'm trying to list all the factors I've mentioned have research behind them. It's dispersed in a mess, and a lot of that research is on non-human animals. But still, it's plausible that if we do the kinds of things I've described, we are going to have more impact from our experiences, including on a retreat. And when I teach a retreat, I'll mention little tiny things about heightening cultivation, including the cultivation of what it feels like to rest in choiceless awareness, right? That too. Or what it's like to heighten the registration of insight into impermanence, transience, endlessly. Like that too can land more, so we become more lived by it. It becomes more established in us. So, and the trick, which I'll get to later, is that as we cultivate wholesome qualities of mind and heart, craving for pleasure starts falling away. Because more and more we feel filled up already. So we search for it less and less outside of ourselves because we feel filled up already. It's really interesting. Yeah, okay, so first parts. One, doing gratitude, a nice warm feeling in the heart. And kind of what does that mean? So, a couple of things. One, simply just through culture, we can associate certain body sensations with certain emotions. So maybe there's a cultural element there. Beyond that possibility, very often when people are relaxing, like in a gratitude practice, and having positive emotion, you're getting more activation of the parasympathetic wing of the nervous system, which is very entwined with what's called the vagus nerve complex, this very important system. Steve Porges has really talked a lot about polyvagal theory and so forth. You're nodding, you know about it. And the most ancient original branch of the vagus nerve complex innervates, goes into the viscera, including the heart. So it could be very much that as you moved into that, you might have been grateful, as many people are, for their relationships. So you start having gratitude mingling with a sense of connection and love together, which then could very plausibly involve that vagus nerve complex and different patterns of activation in the heart area. I think that neuroscience is a baby science, about really 100 or so years old, a little more, really, give it that. Compared to chemistry or astronomy, it's pretty young. We're still learning lots and lots of things and possibilities. And who knows, there might be, I mean, it's so common in culture when people refer to love or kindness or gratitude even, it's heartfelt in some way. So that. And then second, gender differences. Woo, that's a minefield. So I think I'm going to try to tiptoe through the minefield slightly. Lots of research about differences. Obviously, gender itself is a problematic category. I've known many people for whom it's not really that meaningful, and it had an oppressive impact in their life. So acknowledging that, I want to just pass along 3 observations from the best book I've read about gender in the brain, which has an odd title, comes from an Australian academic. It's called Sexing the Brain. It's a weird title, Sexing the Brain. She makes these really important points. She says, first of all, even if you do find a statistically significant distinction between the brains of, let's say, middle-aged men and middle-aged women, to the extent that those gender categories are meaningful, just because you find a difference doesn't mean it's innate. Because culture is operative immediately, literally. So we have a son and a daughter, 30 and 27, neither of whom went to Stanford, both of whom went to Cal. I'm sorry. Go Bears. Anyway, I tell you, so they're both born, okay? 2 separate nurses came to me after our daughter was born. She was our second child, and said to me, oh, she's going to wrap you around her finger. 2 separate things. Now just think about that. I mean, it wasn't bad at all. It was so sweet, so well intended, and yet right there's a kind of socialization influence that's gendered right from the get-go. And think about all kinds of other things that we have. So neurons that fire together, wire together, differential life experiences that are associated, correlated in some ways with gender to the extent that's a distinction, that's meaningful, can produce changes. So just because you find a change, a lot of people over-infer to the female brain and the male brain that, and they start making an argument that these differences are innate, which is very problematic historically, because usually those arguments have been spun against women. So first point. Second point, and I'm passing along the points from this academic who wrote the book. Second point, even if you find a difference between essentially the average male and average female brain that is innate, let's remember that that difference is that average is essentially the center of a distribution. And the heterogeneity of female brains and the heterogeneity or diversity of male brains is much greater. The variance among female brains or male brains and female brains is much greater than the difference between the average male and average female brain. Really important point. These distributions are offset only slightly, especially if you have good power in your study, to get a statistically significant and publishable distinction right there. And then last, even if there is an innate difference that is pretty substantial, how much difference does it actually make? Practically, plausibly. Even if there's, let's say, a little average greater corpus callosum thickness in the brains of women connecting the 2 hemispheres. So there's maybe more integration between sequential verbal processing, mainly on the left, and imagery, gestalt, holistic processing, mainly on the right. Even if there is a little difference in average corpus callosum thickness, from a practical standpoint, how much difference does that actually make? And are there simple, easy things we might be able to do through mental training, or just simply bringing attention to certain things to compensate for or manage or grow related to those differences? I find it's really, so for me, my takeaway from all this is to appreciate differences, to be respectful about them, and try to be nimble in my relationship to them, but to be really kind of careful and thoughtful about overgeneralizing and the uses to which various forms of ideology or scientific findings are put. You know, if you want to sell a used car, put on a white lab coat. Or if you really want to sell used cars, wear a stethoscope as well. Because science is like the new secular authority, the religion. So I'm just careful about that. Okay, great. All right, last person, then I'll move on, and I will end by 30, yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. So if I got you right, you're saying you were intrigued by what I said about interoception, tuning into yourself from the inside out. And how could one use installation to build the general skill of interoception, if I'm following you right.
Yeah.
That was for, what?
And what are the benefits?
Yeah. That's a very meaningful question for me personally because I landed in adulthood numb from the neck down. Okay? And so for me it was very important, to quote a friend of mine, Samuel Bonder, to wake down, not just wake up, to reclaim my own interior. And so it's very useful for many reasons. For one reason, the basis of cognition and the developmental building blocks of cognition are sensory motor learning. And as people become more able to tune into their own bodies and to use information, including subtle, empathic information about what's happening with other people, as well as to tune into our own bodies for information about our own mental processes so we can nudge them and guide them more skillfully. As we do that, we become more functional, and there's research about this, in highly intellectual, highly academic, highly formal even kinds of settings. So it's very valuable to reclaim your own interior. It's also a way to be able to stay calmer in the middle of pressure and to use awareness of the body to both draw on skills like parasympathetic activation. That's a wing of the nervous system that's calming. It's called the rest and digest wing of the nervous system, in contrast to the fight or flight sympathetic wing of the nervous system. You can't get better at calming and soothing if you're not tuned into the feedback from your body about the results of that. Also, as you become more tuned into and aware of your own body, you're more able to recognize that you're going on being. In Daniel Winnicott, great child psychiatrist phrase, you're basically all right right now, in the middle of everything. And tuning into that signal that's coming up most of the time, that there's enough air to breathe, digestion's proceeding, no sharks chewing on your leg, you're basically all right right now. That's incredibly useful if you're at all anxious or you're dealing in situations that are high pressure, like high performance, to know that still going on living, still going on living, still going on living, because of course we're scared little monkeys and we're always afraid that that's going to stop. So benefits. How to do it? You're getting at a really important point. We can learn skills. We can install skills. So repetition. It's the basic structure. Experience what you want to grow, then internalize it. So experience interoception. It's helpful to just bring attention to simple sensations like breathing, the internal sensations of breathing. That's a really good one for interoception. Or even putting your hand on your diaphragm, and as you inhale or exhale, feeling what's happening there from the inside out. This is going to draw you into your body. Physical pleasure, like suck on that darn raisin for 5 or 10 minutes, like they do in mindfulness training. That's going to heighten interoception. Get interested in, I think of the granularity of mindfulness. Being able to tune into, which I've done myself over time, finer and finer distinctions in body sensations of various kinds. And also granularity temporally of tracking more and more events per unit time, per second. Being able to really be there, which is great. And among other benefits, it helps you really be hedonistic, in a sense. It helps you really enjoy your pleasures because you're so able to really, as I am now more and more by training, able to just, wow, that's amazing. Okay. A stewed prune on retreat with tahini and vanilla yogurt. Oh my God. Okay, one more person, then I want to talk about applications. Great, over here? Yeah. Okay. It's like specifically?
Well,
yeah.
it's our book. Where can I take it?
Oh, okay. Well, the free version is online. I have a TEDx talk. I just go into it. My book, Hardwiring Happiness, really does get into the detail of it, and it's available in many modes. Also on my website, freely offered, are tons of resources. That said, I'll give you 2 takeaways right here, the second of which leads me into kind of my concluding topic. One, my suggestion would be, as you go through your day, I asked a teacher of mine once what he did in his personal practice. It's really interesting. What do you actually do? And he paused for a moment and he said, I stop for suffering. his own and that of other people. So I think there's a place for that, to stop for suffering, to recognize it in ourselves, tension, strain, fatigue, maybe even agonizing suffering in ourselves and other people. Okay, but also stop for the good, stop for the flower, stop for, here I am at Stanford University. Wow, here I am, cement, thank you. Who invented cement? Wow, just wonderful. You know what I mean? There's so many things. Look at the people around you. Like, wow, you're a good person too. And you, glasses, I wear contacts. Thank you, contact lenses. There are just so many moments as you go through your day without overlooking what's problematic, harmful, oppressive, unjust, and so forth. If anything, moving through your day kind of like a hoover, a vacuum cleaner, vacuuming up the ordinary jewels strewn before you in the path each day rather than just trotting by them. That's a wonderful thing to do. Half a dozen times a day, less than half a minute at a time. Maybe you're with someone and you feel befriended by them, or you solve a problem mentally, you get something significant done. It's an opportunity for some worth, some sense of worth or sense of success or accomplishment. Let it land. Neat little moment with a little kid or your pet, or just a moment of something quite profound, whatever it might be. It's like, have the attitude as you go through, the way I imagine it myself, it's like I'm a sticky net. Time's kind of flowing through me. I let the broken bottles and the dog do, I grew up with dogs, just kind of roll on by. But the good stuff, right? And it comes from a not upper middle class, yuppie, oh man, let's look on the bright side. No, it really, for me, comes from two really hard-headed recognitions. One, we need muscles inside. We need to grow resources to deal with life on a good day. We need to grow it. And second, we've got a brain that's biased to the negative. Mother Nature's well-intended plan. That is useful sometimes if you're in a combat zone or you're growing up in what is like a combat zone. Okay, sometimes that bias is useful. But most of the time, the negativity bias just creates needless suffering and conflict and quarrels with others, and also gates or limits the ability to learn from the beneficial experiences we're having. So a kind of clear-eyed second recognition of that bias in the brain also motivates me to be this way. So that's the first suggestion. And then the second suggestion, segueing to what I'm going to do now, is about know the 1 or 2, 3 high priority things you're growing these days. What's your growing edge? What are you trying to develop these days that would really help? And I'll use that as a segue into the next thing, okay? So I want to apply these general methods to developing key resources. In your life situation, aging parent, being a student at Stanford, watching Fox News, whatever it is, that's your challenge these days. What would help to deal with it? Or deal with your old stuff. The loneliness from childhood, the impact of trauma, the impact of a recent relationship breakup. What, if it were more present in the mind, would really help? And you can use this question clinically or in just ordinary life with the people you work with. To answer this question, what would really help? What's your key resource? What are you trying to grow these days in particular? What's your high value experience or muscle to work? I use a map, as it were, a framework based on the 3-stage evolution of the brain. Built like a house from the bottom up in 3 floors. We have the more or less reptilian associated brainstem. Then on top of which we have the more or less mammalian subcortex, although we share some structures with more advanced reptiles in the subcortex. And then on top of which we have the neocortex, that should say neocortex, the primate and especially human portions of the brain. The brain has tripled in volume since our hominid ancestors began 2.5 million or 2.7 million years ago using tools to make tools. They were manufacturing tools with a brain a third our present size. All right? So I count them cousins. All right. So that gives us a roadmap. And not to take this framework too seriously, it identifies that the 3-stage evolution of the brain is very loosely associated with more and more sophisticated ways to manage our three fundamental needs. The needs of any animal, as umbrella terms, for safety, satisfaction, and connection. This is a familiar framework. I'm particularly wanting to call out connection for multiple reasons, including what I see as a bit of a corrective to a predominantly male history of philosophy and psychology that focuses on basically avoiding pain and approaching pleasure, but there's more to life than that. And I think particularly human relationships and mental processes cannot be deconstructed to merely some arithmetic of pain and pleasure. I think there's more going on than that. If nothing else, this framework helps bring attention to different kinds of resources we might grow. Okay, so you see this as a framework? Three fundamental needs, and I'm trying to use this framework for, okay, what would help? So, we want to match resources to needs. And I've just listed here a number of basic resources that I think are particularly related to a need. We might use those resources for other needs, but they're particularly related to these needs. And the closer the match, the better. So I'll tell you a little story about myself. I grew up in a middle class, maybe lower middle class family, West Covina, suburbs of Los Angeles. And in my family, there was no abusive violence. I did not grow up in poverty. I did not have a significant illness or disability as a child. Issues of immobilization, I think, are fundamental challenges to safety. Issues of anxiety, of fear or anger or helplessness tend to really show up here. That was pretty okay for me as a kid. Also here, we had enough food. Also, I was able to do well in school. I was able to achieve, to accomplish goals. I was doing pretty well over here. Disappointment, frustration, and loss of property show up a lot over here. I didn't have big issues there. Here, cue the violins. That's what my wife says. Anyway, both my parents were loving, decent people, but they really were poor at expressing empathy for different reasons. My dad grew up in the Depression in North Dakota, certain Lutheran saturated culture there. My mom was the daughter of a single mother, alcoholic father. My mom was a big sister. She was busy. Her mom was pretty fragile. She had to take over. For there are multiple reasons, the normal needs for empathic attunement and what are called healthy narcissistic supplies in my childhood were honestly in short supply. It's like breathing through a straw in my family. I was enough air, but something important was missing, even for an introvert like myself. And then also in school, I have a very late birthday and I skipped a grade, which was great for many reasons, but socially it had lots of consequences, partly also because I'm sort of shy. I had many experiences of being left out, rejected, unwanted, unseen, dismissed. Again, nothing horrible. I give it a C-, childhood, very small compared to what many people suffer. I'm not trying to equate my issues with them, but things add up over time. Lots of little deficits. The absence of the good can be as consequential as the presence of the bad, especially if it adds up over time. So I landed in college, UCLA, another bear, go Bruins. Anyway, that left me with what felt like a hole in my heart. I tried to fill that hole by being tough and strong and defensive and defended, resolute, doing physical things, maybe a good place for that, but it did not fill the hole in my heart. It was like I was taking iron, and I had scurvy. I needed vitamin C. Also here, I partied. I had a good time in college, a lot of pleasure. I also was very successful. I accomplished a lot of stuff, a lot of accomplishments. There were many things I was grateful for, including my parents' support. But that did not fill the hole in my heart. It was like I was taking B vitamins there. It was really when I started zeroing in on and listening to the longing in my heart, rather than dismissing the longings in your heart, listening to them as a teacher. What are they telling you? What are they telling you that is the nutrient, your personal vitamin C, that will really make a difference? So I started deliberately looking for facts that were different from my childhood, where I was included, where people were smiling at me, where friends would say, "Hey, Hanson, come on over and sit with us." A girl would smile at me. 2 girls would smile at me, young women, would smile at me in the elevator. We had this major stud athlete on our intramural football team who was a junior. He's older than me and a great athlete, too small to play Division I football. And he gruffly said to me one day as a totally dorky 16 or 17-year-old freshman, "Hanson, you're good. I'm going to throw to you more." Oh my God. It's like a God had touched me, just walked by. I can still feel it. I remember it. It's like, yeah. You know, it's such a corrective to feeling like a total dork in school, picked last for sports teams. Anyway, so I started taking in those supplies. I recognized the facts, let myself feel something, and especially started taking it in. That was my vitamin C. And brick by brick, synapse by synapse, I gradually, truly have filled that hole in my heart. What's your vitamin C? What's your resource that would be well matched to current conditions and or old pain or old deficits? What would be so good to experience today that would have been so wonderful to have experienced back then? Or intuitively, what feels like something you're trying to help establish itself in you. Maybe it's a commitment to sobriety. Maybe it's a fundamental disentangling of old hassles with your family. My dad had a phenomenal gesture, kind of rooted, he's no longer alive, in his North Dakota background. He had a little gesture. He'd say, "Rick, don't fuss with that." Just see what I'm doing with my hand, that embodied cognition. Rick, don't fuss with that. Right now I'm trying to internalize that. Whew, I don't need to fuss with that. What might you be trying to really develop in yourself these days, including not fussing with certain things? Whatever it might be. Maybe it's a subtle spiritual growing edge for you in your meditative practice. What are you trying to help land for yourself? What's your vitamin C? All right? To sum up, and to put this in a really dorky but very, I think, memorable way, routinely I think it's useful to give ourselves repeated experiences of the resting state, where we default to when we feel like needs are met, when there's a sufficiency, rather than where we go when we feel like our needs are not being met and we tip into fight, flight, freeze because there's a sense of something missing and something wrong. So repeatedly, whenever you have a chance, pet the lizard for safety. Repeatedly look for those experiences. Safety is arguably the most fundamental need of all. It tends to trump the other ones. And I like lizards. Also, again and again, why not feed the mouse? It's really funny, as we fill the hungry heart and really internalize pleasurable, sometimes sensual, positive experiences, including things like gratitude, we become less hungry for them outside ourselves. And for sure, hug the monkey. This is the universal medicine, the multivitamin. Love is a primal signal of safety. It hits all 3 needs. Relatedness also is very rewarding, and of course, it satisfies our needs for our connection. Can you see the 4th monkey in the picture? Yeah, little buddy. All right, so you just feel that. Oh. So to wrap up, and I'll make sure we have a little time at the very end as well. And I think I'll in fact finish on a little practice of something I do routinely. In the morning before I get up, sometimes before I go to sleep, sometimes at the start of a formal meditation practice, to just kind of authentically return home. This is our home base. This is the resting state when we're not disturbed. This is Mother Nature's body-mind plan for conserving resources and repairing and refueling from bursts of stressful activity. This is our home base, our equilibrium condition. And peace, contentment, and love as 3 placeholder terms, umbrella terms, for feeling safe enough, satisfied enough, and connected enough. There could be issues. We can feel peaceful while having our safety needs challenged, but we feel an enoughness of capability. We can be contented even in significant poverty. I was teaching with a man from Bhutan. He runs their gross domestic happiness program in Bhutan. In significant amounts of what we would consider to be poverty, there can be a great deal of contentment. Not to justify or countenance poverty, but to think, meanwhile, even if I don't get everything, I can still feel contented in my heart, and of course resting in love. All right? So I'm going to finish on a little couple minutes of practice here, but I want to touch base on some wider implications. For individuals, repeatedly, again and again and again, taking in a sense of needs met, which is really counterintuitive in our consumer culture. Repeatedly internalizing experiences of needs met, in other words, experiences of well-being, builds up strengths inside that enable us to meet the next moment feeling already safe enough, satisfied enough, and connected enough. That, I think, is the fundamental basis of resilient happiness for individuals. But for societies, who could not be thinking about these matters these days in terms of their wider implications, given that historically for humans, the natural social size of a human group is about 50 people. The actual political unit that our hunter-gatherer ancestors adapted to and used is about 30 adults. So in this room, there's something on the order of 5, 7 tribes, easily. So just think about that, how weird that is. And I've thought a lot about how vulnerable we are to these ancient appeals to fear, thread level orange. If it bleeds, it leads. Or just at the level of relationships, how easy we are to manipulate with fear and threat. Thought a lot about how easy it is to manipulate people with greed. Not enough here, need to get more, consumerism, and how that drives modern consumer-based economies. And how also easy people are to manipulate us. We've seen very recently in our country and around the world with us against them, fear, dehumanization, exploitation, and conflict of various kinds. But when people repeatedly build up resources inside that address their needs for safety, satisfaction, and connection, they're a lot harder to manipulate in those age-old ways. I think it's really important to change external conditions, but even in countries, in the developed countries of the world that are very wealthy, ordinary person in America today lives better than kings and queens 100 years ago. Medicine, technology, chocolate, good beer, the important things, ESPN, ibuprofen, some of my favorites, contact lenses, reliable birth control, things like that were just not available 100 years ago. The point is not just to change external conditions, we have to experience that our needs are met. We have to take in the good. Otherwise, we become, as in the Tibetan mythology, the realm of the hungry ghosts, which for me is a great metaphor for consumer culture. Godlike beings with godlike powers who have appetites represented as enormous bellies, but their capacity in consumer culture to satisfy their appetites is represented by a pinhole for a mouth. If we don't actually let our enjoyable, beneficial, fulfilling, meaningful experiences really land, they pass right through us, and we're still hungry for the next one around the corner. So, my own hope is that if we can get a critical mass, about a billion brains rested most seconds of most days, most minutes of most days, in peace, contentment, and love, we might be able to gradually come to a softer landing by the end of this century than the one we're currently heading toward. That's my real hope. So in the 60s and 70s, when I came of age, we talked about how the personal is the political, and the political is the personal. The two don't go together. So when we do our personal practices of filling up our own cup, we do it for the sake of others as well, both so that we can be more at peace in our dealings with others, and also so that we have more to offer others too. So how about we practice for a minute or two, and then I'll finish with a little quotation, and it's a wrap. Okay? So you want to give it a whirl. I'm going to go backwards slightly. Here we go. This practice. Peace, contentment, and love. So you can spend a long period of time with this, or I like things that are fairly quick. So first, I'm going to encourage you right here to relax. Notice you're basically all right now, and there's an enoughness of safety in this moment. In the future, something might happen. In the past, things may have happened. But right now, you can afford to come to a greater sense of tranquility. Feeling as safe as you reasonably can, noticing needless anxiety or tension and letting it go, and resting, and I'll be quiet now, opening to as much as you can, and resting in a sense of peace. And second, if you like, shifting attention more to contentment, allowing peacefulness to sort of move to the back of the mind, thinking of ways that you feel grateful already. It'd be nice to have more, and there can be a sense of enoughness already. Thinking of things that bring a little smile, you're glad about. So that you can help yourself find a kind of contentment, kind of a soft happiness and enoughness already. Letting go of frustration or disappointment or drivenness. Knowing you can still aspire without being attached to what happens. Seeing if you can help yourself come home to a simple contentment. And then last, of course, love. Allowing contentment to move to the back of the mind. Being aware of beings that care about you. It doesn't have to be a perfect relationship, but in a true way, currently or in your past, you have mattered to beings. Friends, allies. Also feeling your own warm heart. Love is love, whether it's flowing in or flowing out. You can even put a hand on your heart if you care to strengthen this experience. It can be very simple and down to earth, finding a friendliness in yourself, finding compassion for those who suffer. Helping yourself come home to a warm-heartedness, a lovingness. And then in the last minute here, we'll just be silent together, exploring what it's like to have a general sense of the mind at rest. Heart is open, you're alert, you're awake, there's well-being and contentment. Mind at ease, the falling away of any sense of disturbance. A sense of coming home to the resting state. And knowing as we finish here that we can rest in, I call it the green zone, the responsive mode of the brain, of peace, contentment, and love as we deal with challenges, as we deal with life. Because we dream big dreams, speak truth to power, deal with real issues and problems, in the core of our being, we can still have an unshakable, resilient well-being. How to do it, as I finish here, first I do want to thank Helena and also Tia Rich and Stanford altogether and you for giving me your attention and heart so clearly tonight. I think about this teaching that's come down to us from the Buddhist tradition. It goes like this, speaking to the how. How do we rest here in this world of challenges? The teaching is, think not lightly of good, saying, it will not come to me. Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good. That's our opportunity every day, and no one can take it from us if we choose to exercise it ourselves. So may you and I fill ourselves with good for our own sake and that of all beings. Thank you very much. Thank you.